Bluegrass Airport is an American aviation story. Its remarkable history has been chronicled through a series of oral history interviews. We're speaking with David Trapp, who is a second-generation aviation enthusiast and former member of the Lexington-Fayette Urban County Airport Board. David, tell us about your early memories of Bluegrass Field.
Well, we lost Dad, in November. I'm involved in aviation because of him. He brought me here. I guess my earliest memories of Bluegrass Airport have to be around 1960, maybe 61, and I was all of, 4 years old at the time, but we would come here every Sunday after church and Sunday school in the old terminal building, of which I desperately last night tried to find some pictures of, and I know there's a few. I have one from the airport. When I was on the board here, they gave me a really neat picture that has the old terminal still standing with the new terminal. It was an aerial picture, and it was very cool because I remember standing on the upper decks of the old white building, and I remember the day specifically I saw my first jet. And as they say, there's a moment in your aviation career when you decide, I'm going to fly, and I remember that day distinctly, and I couldn't have been 3 years old, but Daddy brought me here every Sunday, and he would sit down with Wendell Murphy and Logan Gray and all the old guys. At that time, the old guys, he was a young guy, but they would do coffee and crosswords, and we would run around out on the airport. I had a bicycle out here. I used to ride up and down the runway. That's no kidding. Think about that now. And he had me in an airplane before I could ride a bike, and had an old Crosley biplane out here at the end of what used to be runway. I think it's 330, and it was dirt floored hangar and gravel taxiways and the little old terminal building, and those are the things I remember from very early on. But Dad's involvement with the airport, it was really from what we call the backside, the general aviation side. He always had old airplanes and little single engines and twins and just everything I can think of. I mean, he had a multitude of different aircraft through the years and was active here all the way up until about a year or so ago. But he was a great guy, and he was one of the true aviators. But there was another fellow here at the Bluegrass Airport. Everybody here remembers Chuck Bomer Flying Service, and one of my dad's tales was when he came back from the war, he was a B-29 captain, was stationed in Tinian, and got shot up and shot down and everything. He everything but die in the war. He was one of the lucky ones. But when he came back to Lexington, he couldn't fly little planes. And the story goes is here's, Dad's a big, Air Force bomber pilot and comes back home, and so he has to sneak out here on the weekends and late in the afternoon, and Chuck Bomer taught him how to fly small regular airplanes. He kept that a secret for a long time, but I found out about it later.
Talk about the differences between Bluegrass Airport now and in days past.
Well, I've been fortunate to be here almost every day since the early 60s, and so there's a whole lot of other folks besides myself, but I own a business here, and I operate on the airport as well as our private aircraft that we have here, and it's been a real change from what I remember as a child and the way it is now. It's an unfortunate, necessary evil that we operate in the world of aviation the way we do, but the aviation is divided, up into several groups, and you have commercial and corporate aviation, and you have private and general aviation, and the two in today's world don't exist very well together without some real challenges on an airport. Bluegrass Airport, I think, is, in the last few years especially, has done a fantastic job of addressing a lot of those issues, and I can certainly tell you it's a much better place to be now than it was 3 or 4 years ago. But it's just the sign of the times that we live in.
Have you heard any stories about the old airfields?
I was, being real young at that time, there was a Cool Meadow airfield was out the old Newtown Pike where Fasig-Tipton is now, and I remember going there once. It was really pretty much, I think, already closed by that point, but I remember landing out there with my dad in one of his old biplanes when I was really little. And then the original Georgetown Airport, which I went to once as well, but I know they were there, but I never spent really any time there. But the one place that I do recall that was another great place growing up during those early years was Kelly Field. And Kelly Field was on what was his name? Dudley Kelly. And his farm was right off the end of Runway 4 out here on Deadman Lane and Bowman's Mill and all that. And he had a little fly-in strip out there, and again, every Saturday and Sunday, he would have fly-ins out there once a month during the summer. And we'd take off out of Runway 22 and fly about 3 minutes and land in this cow field right off the end of Runway 4. And all the old crop dusters and tail wheelers and all the little guys that were flying the model airplanes were there. And it's long since gone, but you know, that was a great place to be, and it was so close to Bluegrass.
Explain what a fly-in is.
That's when a bunch of crazy airplane people all come to the same spot.
Would you rephrase that by saying a fly-in is?
A fly-in is basically where folks flying all different types of aircraft will go and meet up, and usually they have picnics and barbecues and take each other for rides in everybody else's airplanes. And usually you'll find lots of, you know, biplanes and tail draggers and things like that. Sometimes you'll have the cars, but you know, we don't care about cars. I mean, it's all about airplanes.
Do they still do fly-ins?
They do. There's, I'm trying to think, Lee Bottom. I don't know if you've heard of the Lee Bottom airstrip, which is up on the river, on the, I guess it's the Ohio River or the Kentucky River. It's between Cincinnati and Louisville. What is it? Is that the Ohio River? I mean, that's embarrassing. I believe it is the Ohio River. And they have one there every year, and it's one of the largest ones anywhere around this part of the country. They have something like, I don't know, it's almost 500 or 600 airplanes there. It's crazy. I mean, and the biggest airplane, this is a grass strip, a short grass strip, and the largest plane, there's a fellow that brings a DC-3 almost every year. And that's a fascinating flying to me. Of course, the big ones are Oshkosh and Sun and Fun down in Florida, but those are ginormous. The old-fashioned, you know, Sunday afternoon fly-ins where you'll have 15 or 20 planes come. You don't see a whole lot of that anymore, but it's pretty fun when you do.
David, what are some of your favorite stories related to Bluegrass Field?
I guess the two coolest things that I think I did while I was here is I ran some air shows, or was involved with the running of some air shows here back in the early 90s, and started off as a volunteer in, I think, 89, and ended up as the show chairman in 95. And I think the two coolest things to me were we hosted the United States Thunderbirds in 91, which was fun for me because being involved is a little different than actually going to the air show. It became a full-time job for almost a year to put the thing on, and we haven't done any since. And everybody used to ask, when are we going to do another? And I said, well, I'm never doing another one, but maybe some. And then, of course, unfortunately, we had 9/11, and there'll never be an air show here again, I don't think. It's just not feasible. But having the Thunderbirds here was a very special thing. And I think one of the other neat things that happened at Bluegrass is when the Concorde was here. And again, being involved with the airport, I was able to get to places the ordinary folks couldn't go. And I remember standing on top of the fire rescue building when they took off in the Concorde, and that was a spectacular moment, particularly for a pilot, to sit there and be that close to the thing when it actually broke ground and went off. I mean, I'll never forget that. And the president's been here a few times, and it was nice for the president to be here, but I was a whole lot more interested in the tour of Air Force One, which was very exciting. And I was on the board then. I'm pretty sure that's the only reason I got to do that. Is my one perk from being on the airport board here is I got to tour Air Force One. But that was pretty interesting. They let us go up in the cockpit, and you know, really, the guy was very nice. We spent a couple hours on board, and he showed us every inch of that airplane, and the security was unimaginable. You think we have security at the airport? It was nothing compared to that. I mean, that was very interesting, and that was enjoyable. There have been lots of other things that have happened here. You know, getting up in the middle of the night and go out and fix an airliner is fun still, and I guess I'll keep doing that as long as I think it's fun. But being on the board here was also very interesting because it gives you a different insight into the actual runnings of the airport. I mean, airports aren't really quite as simple as a lot of people probably think, and I must say, from being on both sides of the fence, you know, when the security issues started here and lots of things really started to change here, there was, of course, as you can imagine, a huge outcry from the general aviation population here about why do we have to do this, and this is ridiculous, and on and on and on and on. And to a degree, I sort of felt the same way until I spent 4 years on the board here. And again, this was at a time when things really changed. And I have to say, it's not all as simple as people might want to think that it is. And it is a serious business, and there is a lot to it. And I think in the earlier days, things were really hard to operate here or to fly here. There were a lot of things that weren't good. But within the last 3 or 4 years especially, it has dramatically changed, and I think the airport has done an excellent job of trying to figure out how to operate under the parameters that they must operate, as at the same time allowing the folks that use the airport and work here to be here and work as well. So it's a tough job, but they've got it right now, I think. I hope a lot of people would agree on the other side of the airport with me, but it's a good place to be now, and I hope it stays that way.
Who are some of your favorite people associated with the airport?
Well, Chuck was and I was pretty young when he was here, but I remember him. He was just a neat old fellow. I mean, he was a quintessential, you know, airport guy, you know, for pilots and people that owned airplanes. Wendell Murphy was just one of the coolest guys I ever knew, and he was so adamant about aviation and trying to preserve the aviation history, and hence the Kentucky Aviation, or I think it actually started out the Aviation History Roundtable, as I recall, and then that evolved into the Kentucky Aviation Museum, and then they have the Kentucky Aviation Hall of Fame. So Wendell was instrumental in all those things, and he. I remember as a child, I can't remember exactly when he lost his sight, but it was, I can't remember, midlife, I guess, maybe. So he was, you know, had flown, and so he knew what he was talking about and what he was seeing. And I remember standing with him when we had the air shows, and I would describe to him, you know, when the airplanes would come in. I remember the F-4 landed and had the drag chute out and all that stuff. And I remember standing there with Wendell describing to him. He was a really cool guy. We all miss Wendell a lot.
Would you tell us about your observations of Bluegrass Field as it evolved into the present airport?
Well, in the old days, I guess I'm old enough to say in the old days, you know, you could drive out to the airport and walk out to your airplane, crank it up and go fly. Like I said, I had a bike out here and rode a bike all around. And now, you know, you've got to be photographed and fingerprinted and all that sort of stuff, and go through all kinds of hoops to even get to your airplane. And, you know, I think for me, really, I was trying to think, I guess in the the mid-'80s, I can't remember exactly when they went to I remember when we got the first badge, and you had the badge, and I remember Donnie Sexton was the director of operations here at that time, and I remember they had a meeting somewhere over on the other side of the airport, in Sprite Flights building or something, and they were beginning to institute this where everybody had to have a badge, and you had to, and I remember there were a lot of angry people over there, and I remember Donnie Sexton standing up there, and people were pretty ugly, frankly. And I just remember the professionalism of Donnie Sexton standing up there as a representative of the airport, fielding these really angry questions from people, and I just remember him doing a spectacular job with that, and I think that's when I remember, boy, things are really going to change at this airport. It's never going to be the same again, and for me, that was the day I remember distinctly. This is not going to ever be the same place again, and it got a lot worse after that before it got a lot better. But I remember Donnie. I mean, I don't know whether I ever told him that. I hope I did later, because I tell you what, had that been me, it would have been ugly. I mean, these people were just rude to him. It was almost like, oh, this is Donnie's idea, and he's going to lock down the airplane. It had nothing to do with him. And these are supposed to be intelligent, educated pilots. You know, they don't give pilot's licenses just to anybody. I mean, you got to have some intelligence, and you would think that they would have a little more insight to, you know, things are changing and the airport's got to do this and that and the other. But I remember that as being, that was a pretty ugly day. And I distinctly remember, boy, we're in for a ride. And it was for a lot of years after that. Everybody's kind of used to it now, but some of the stuff's still kind of ridiculous. But, you know, what are you going to do? It's either pack up and go home or you deal with it.
Do you remember the old terminal building?
Oh yeah, it was a white building. It was a circular building, had a circular front. I remember one of the coolest things about it, and something I really miss here, is it had a little restaurant, coffee shop downstairs. It had with round glass windows, and you could sit there and watch the planes and have a little snack or hamburger or something. And I mean, it was small, obviously. It wasn't terribly large. It was more of an Art Deco type building. I think it was built in 1945 or 6, if I remember right. And it was just I tell you, the closest thing to it is the old terminal well, there's two of them at Lunken. They've retained their old original terminal, and it has a neat little restaurant in it. That's a place we fly to eat a lot. And then the other one is over at Louisville, at Bowman Field. They managed to maintain their original terminal building, and it also has a great French restaurant and offices in it, and then you can go up into the tower and, you know, look around, and those are really cool buildings. And Lexington's was very much like that, and it was really sad when they tore it down. That was in 1976, I believe, and it's a shame they couldn't have figured out some way to retain it, but you know, once it's gone, it's gone. And it was sad, but that was the end of an era when they tore that one down. But speaking of terminals, the new terminal, which was opened in 1975 or 6, I can't remember. I believe it was 76, maybe it was 76. When did Elvis die?
76.
76, and they opened it in 76. And well, the reason I remember that is I know the new terminal opened in early 76, but I remember Elvis died in what, June, July, something like that. My brother was leaving to go to Belgium. He was working for the state of Kentucky's Department of Tourism, and he was leaving, and we were all out here to say goodbye to him. And the terminal had just opened recently, so we were kind of looking around. And all of a sudden on the overhead speakers, the airport announcer came on and announced that Elvis Presley had died. And so I was standing downstairs in the new terminal building when we got that news. And I remember that vividly. And we had tickets to go see him because he was going to be at the new Rupp Arena. And sadly, I've lost the tickets, which is kind of nuts. But you know, it's funny how I remember being at the new terminal at the Bluegrass Airport when they announced that Elvis Presley died. I mean, I need to get out of here more or something. You know, But I remember that. That's a vivid memory of being here. And of course, I think we have a great terminal now. When I was on the board, we had designed the extension for Concourse B, I believe it was, and then I left the board before it really had gotten started. And can you believe it was just the other day that I was ever in that concourse? I had a good friend here and had to bring her to the airport at like 5 a.m. And it was the first time I'd actually walked I'm on the other side a lot out on the airline ramp, but I hadn't actually been up into the new main part of the B concourse. And I remember walking down, I thought, well, this is pretty nice. A lot of years later, I finally get to see it, but it was very nice. But it's been a lot of changes here, but I miss the old terminal building. I mean, that was just simple and easy, but we have a whole lot more people that come through now than we did then. The Queen was here. That was fun when she came. I wish we could do more things like that here. I really wish we could have air shows here again. I mean, I was just amazed at the number of people that came out here. Even today, it still amazes me the actual interest that the average individual has in aviation, just aviation period. One of the questions on your list was, what did I think about what could we do to I think it was interest young people in aviation and stuff like that. And that's a great question. I mean, we have people come to our maintenance facility often. whenever we have any of our warbirds out on the ramp on the backside next to the chain link fence, our hangars back up to the airport road, and whenever we have the hangars open or we have any of the warbirds out, it just amazes me how many people stop and get out of their car and come up to the chain link fence, you know, hanging on the fence, you know, just in amazement at these airplanes. And we often, that's why we can't get anything done down there, because we always stop and let them in. We escort them in and show them the airplanes. And there's been a lot of times when we've actually taken people for rides just because that's what we want to do. If you don't do that, you're never going to get anybody interested in it. A lot of times it's young folks. We don't get as many of the older folks anymore because we've lost so many of them. But the young kids, like my little guy who's 3.5 years old, I mean, it's insane. I mean, I don't know if it's because I'm involved in aviation or he really truly likes airplanes this much. I think kids really take an affinity to whatever their parents are doing. But, you know, he can't go to bed at night unless he's got his model Mustang with him. So, you know, hopefully he'll grow up and want to take on, because after us, then who? I mean, and I'm speaking about antique and classic aviation, not airlines. You know, I think the airlines will always be there, but we're losing an awful lot of people that have the interest and the ability to maintain and fly antique, classic, and warbird airplanes, and that's something that's sad to me. It's the FAA is making it very difficult to continue. Expense of it is making it difficult to continue. So it's kind of sad. And I think about that a lot more now than I did 10 or 15 years ago. So we try to do everything we can. Any young person that expresses any interest at all, we bring them in and show them around, and who knows, maybe they'll later down the road take an interest in it.
Were you at the airport when the University of Kentucky won the NCAA championship?
In 1978, I was not here, so I don't remember that one. But in the 90s, I guess 90, because they hadn't won one for a long period of time, I think. Well, you can tell I'm a big UK fan, can't you? I mean, I know just enough about this to be dangerous. I think it was 96 or 95. Anyway, in the 90s when they won. I do remember that, and that was fun. And again, you know, because I was able to have ramp access, because again, you know, everything's fenced off by that point in time. In '78, it was wide open. I can imagine that was probably a mob scene. Would have been fun to have been here now that I think about it, because I guess the people would have just, you know, once the airplane pulled up, I bet they probably just mobbed the whole ramp. It was kind of sad because in the 90s, they were all on the other side of the fence, which is the old TAC Air building, or what was it at that time? I think the Sprite Flight building, I think. I remember, I've never seen so many people, other than the air shows, I hadn't seen that many people out here in years, because the last air show was in 92, 95, I guess. So, but they got back, and I think it was after dark. But I remember being out on the ramp, some of us other guys that were at work, we stayed late because we knew they were coming back. And it was quite the scene when the plane came up. I thought they were going to break the fence down. I really did. It was a little, and we had police. You couldn't even get to the airport. I mean, it was crazy. As a matter of fact, I remember coming to the airport, now that I think about it, they wouldn't let us come to the airport. And had I not had my trusty airport ID badge, I probably wouldn't have even gotten here. And I think we made up a fib about, you know, we got a broken airliner, you know, they've called us to come fix it. And I think it was the only reason we got close to the airport that night. I thought, well, what the heck? And I remember there was a mob scene. But I remember when they got off the airplane, it was interesting, because they all the players and the coaches, they stayed on the ramp side for a while. And then I remember they went over to the fence. And I remember it was kind of weird, because we had all the fans on one side of the fence and we had the players on the other side of the fence, and they were shaking hands through the fence and signing stuff through the fence. And I thought, you know, that's kind of a shame that, you know, the fence was there. But I think on the other hand, it's probably for the safety of the ball players, because I mean, it really was a mob scene. And so thinking back what you had said about the earlier years in the 70s when they won, boy, I bet that was a real melee. Wish I'd have been here for that one, but unfortunately I wasn't.
Do you remember the Queen's visit?
She visited us at Spendthrift Farm in '84, and I remember being at the airport when she arrived, and then we went with her, I guess, entourage out to the farm, and And she spent the day at the farm with my family and my grandfather. She had a couple of horses there, and that was pretty exciting. I'm not so sure I thought it was all that exciting at the time, and I look back on it, I think, boy, that was really cool. And then she came. She was here a few years ago, but I think she went to the Farishes when she was here for that trip. But there's a couple of really great stories about that. That's off topic, but my grandfather. Well, no, I can dovetail this into a Bluegrass airport. Let's try this. My grandfather owned Spendthrift Farm, which was a rather well-known thoroughbred farm here, and he and Wendell Murphy, before Wendell died, sent me some photographs. And my wife we tried to find them, and I can't because we've moved a couple times since then. I hope I can find them. I think I know where they may be. But Wendell sent me some photographs with a very nice note, and I kept the note because it was very nice. And he said, "David, I thought you might like to have these." And I look at these pictures. They're pictures of my grandfather here at the airport, and I believe it was over on the end of old runway 30. And they were unloading horses off of and I can't remember what the airplane was. I want to say it was a DC-3, but I'm not sure. But apparently, according to Wendell's note, this was the first horse that was ever flown into Bluegrass Airport, and it was one of Granddad's. And there's a picture of grandfather and grandmother and some other folks I didn't know, and this airplane and this horse, and it just looks like an ordinary horse getting off an airplane to me. I mean, I didn't think anything about it, but Wendell's note said that this was the first horse that was ever flown into Lexington. And so I thought, well, that's kind of cool. And it was so nice of Wendell to come across that and send it to me. But so grandfather had that connection to the airport and started flying horses in and out. But when the Queen visited, was interesting because when she came to the farm, and I wasn't in the room when this happened, but I've certainly heard about it. I'm sure the story's been embellished quite a bit. And you know, there's a lot of etiquette and protocol when you're around the Queen. I never got to meet her, I just got to see her from a distance. But at the house at Spendthrift, there was this beautiful porch room that overlooked part of the farm, and that's apparently where they met when she was there, that she went in to have tea with him. And apparently when the Queen enters the room, you're of course supposed to be standing, and grandfather was a little bit elderly even at that point, and so he did not stand when she came in the room. And she went over to say hello, and apparently you're not supposed to actually shake hands with the Queen, I think, unless, I'm not quite sure exactly all that, but the brief story is that instead of doing all the protocol, Granddad said, you know, to hell with all that. So he apparently did stand up when she came over to him and just grabbed her hand and shook it and said, "How you doing, baby rabbit?" And apparently all the people that were in the room from the Queen's side, apparently a couple of them fainted or something, I don't know. And they just like had coronaries. And of course, grandfather was an old English gentleman, and he called all women and ladies baby rabbit. That was his endearing term for women. And so all the attendees or whoever, by the time they start breathing again, they've turned blue. The Queen apparently thought this was absolutely wonderful, and she invites him to Buckingham Palace as her guest, like the next year or something, to come see some of her horses, which he did subsequently go and do. So that was kind of cool. But the real story is when Margaret came here, and apparently he did the same thing to her, and apparently she had no sense of humor whatsoever and looked at him and said, you know, "My sir, the next time you'll address me as blah, whatever the proper address is." And of course, grandfather immediately responded, "Don't worry about it, baby rabbit, there won't be a next time." So that was, so he wasn't apparently a big Margaret fan. But he and the Queen got along famously, and apparently were very good friends, you know, from then on, and wrote back and forth. And I think they had seen each other a few times even after that, but that has nothing to do with airport, but it's a good story. I'd have given anything to be there. Knowing my grandfather as I did, people say, "You think he really said that?" Oh, hell yeah, he said that. I'm sure he did.
Talk about visits from other high-profile people.
Well, I was never really terribly involved with any of that. I mean, that's not something, normally when you have those types of high-profile individuals, particularly in recent history, the security is rather tight. I do know that when we had our maintenance facility over in the old TAC Air building, any high-profile visits, they would make us pull all the vehicles off the ramp. We had to close the hangar doors, and we weren't even allowed to look out. I mean, it's really kind of sad, but so I never really was able to be involved with any of that. When President when President Bush was here, first Bush, was kind of neat because J.D. Case, who was the chief of security here, and was a good friend of mine, and we'd known each other for many, many years. And I actually got to shake hands with George Bush, which was really cool when he was here. And he was neat. Of course, I think he was a pretty neat guy, but that was fun. And that was really about the closest I ever got. And then when I got to go on Air Force One, and when Clinton was here, and that's about the closest I got to any truly high-profile visitors, other than the time I about knocked Dan Quayle over out here in the hall. That was interesting. In the old, before they did a lot of the changing up here, the engineering office was right down here and had a door that comes out into this long hallway. And if you come out that door, you can't see if anybody's walking up and down the hall. And I was up here for whatever reason, and I came out that door, and just as I came out that door, here comes Quayle. I mean, we literally, boom, right into each other. And really nice guy. He apologized to me. I said, well, good Lord, no, I'm the one that came out barging out the door. And J.D. was there, and he was walking right behind him, and of course he turned white as a sheet because here I've just run the vice president over, but he couldn't have been more polite. And we actually stood there and talked for a couple minutes, and he was a very personable fellow. I think he got a really bad rap. I think the media really kind of destroyed him, but I found him to be a very, very personable fellow.
Talk about some of the issues that came up while you were on the Lexington-Fayette County Airport Board. Lengthening the runway seemed to be an ongoing process.
It was absolutely the biggest controversy I'd ever been involved in. And the general public, unfortunately, and I lay this again at the media just killed us because everything they wrote was expansion, expansion, expansion. And of course, you hear the word expansion, everybody goes crazy. The airport's expanding, they're taking over farmland, they're doing this, they're doing that. And it was just awful. I mean, we'd get angry phone calls. I can recall many conversations with people that were just furious. I mean, literally just mad. And it was hard to make them understand how important the airport is to the community. I mean, we were talking about people being interested in aviation. I still don't think that most people really understand how critically important this airport is to this community and the surrounding area. It is vital. And I try to make people understand that. One guy called me up and was just literally just tearing my head off about, we don't even need the airport, just close it up, go to Cincinnati. And so finally I asked the guys, let me ask you a question. Do you like to go out and take your wife to dinner and go have a nice seafood dinner? And what's that got to do with anything? Just humor me, just answer my question. Do you like to go out and have a nice fresh seafood dinner? Do you like to buy your wife fresh flowers? Well, yeah, what's that got to do? I said, well, I would be almost willing to bet you the best dinner in town that the flowers and the seafood and Lord knows whatever else probably came through that airport. And so, and that was just, there are dozens of examples, but that was just the first one I could think of. And he, by the time I got done with him on the phone, he grudgingly admitted, well, maybe I use that airport and I don't even know it. I said, you use this airport every day and you don't know it. I still don't think it needs to expand. So I was like, okay, I give up.
Were you here when the SST Concorde landed at Bluegrass Airport?
Yeah, but the landing was nowhere near as impressive as the taking off. Yeah, I mean, it was only here. Did it stay overnight? I think it did stay overnight. It landed in the afternoon, and the landing was, it was neat because it's just a cool airplane. I never had the opportunity to fly on the Concorde, and I wish I had. My parents did, but I never got the chance. When I was living in Europe, it was just beginning service, and I was in Paris one day at the racetrack, and that thing took off out of Le Bourget and flew right over the track where we were, and that was the first time I saw it, and that was in like 1973 or 4, and I just thought that was just one of the most spectacular things I ever saw. That thing came right over us. And then we used to watch it in Miami, but I never got as close to it as I did here at Lexington. I mean, we went over and walked all around underneath of it, and I remember Betty and Kent Mosley, who I had known from here at the airport since I was old enough to ride my bike here. They taxied their little airplane up there and parked it in front of it and took a picture of it. I still have that picture with Betty and Kent standing up on top of their little airplane. And that was really cool. But when it left here, it was like standing next to the space shuttle. I'll never forget that. This is very cool.
Can we talk about the Flight 5191 tragedy?
In a former life, I was a paramedic and a firefighter. And so I know all the fire chiefs and all the people. I was involved with that for many, many years. And I got a call. I got a call about 20 minutes after it happened. One of the airport staffers had called me because they figured I might want to know that. And I didn't know it, obviously. And so I got up and came out here immediately. And I was also working with the Lexington Police on their air support unit at that same time. So I got here about 8:30. I think I got here pretty quick. I live right next door to the airport now, but at that time I lived on the other side of town. And we went up to the site, and we were there pretty quickly and got down there. And I've done a lot of things in recovery and rescue and fire services, but that was a pretty awful scene. It was very upsetting, and I knew most of the people that were there. That's actually when I first met Miss Hirschman. But it was, we went up to the end of the runway, and I remember going up to the end of runway 26, and I could see in the grass where the tires went off the runway and through the grass, and then I saw where they stopped, which is where he obviously got airborne, and then got over to the fence, and I saw there was one of the gear doors off the aircraft was laying right there at the base of the fence, so it was clear to me that they had hit the fence. And then we walked on down and we saw the tree, and I'll never forget the tree, because the tree was, it wasn't really a great big huge tree, but it struck me funny as how half of the tree was just like almost gone, and it was charred. And the other half of the tree was just almost perfectly fine. And then it, of course, went on down the hill and through the fence and a couple other trees and came to rest down at the bottom of the hill. And I remember thinking, looking at that, and I thought, man, if that tree wasn't there, this guy, maybe he could have got out of here. But the tree is, I think, what did it. Even hitting the fence, I think maybe they could have, maybe, I don't know that the fence would have brought it down, but the tree definitely did when they hit the tree. And I think I've read the reports and I've looked at all the stuff, and I can't remember exactly which portion of the airplane actually hit that tree, but that was a bad day. I've done a lot of things and seen a lot of stuff, but that ranks up there as obviously one of the most horrific things I'd ever seen. And I went down to the aircraft with the fire chief, and the state fire marshal was a guy I used to work with as a paramedic. So we had a lot of people here that I knew, and there, of course, a lot of the other board members were there. I don't think most of them went down to the actual crash site, but I did go down there, and it was it was a completely unsurvivable event. And I must say, and I hate to even say anything like this with Deborah Hirschman even in the building, because I don't know whether she would agree with me or not, but there was an awful lot of speculation. I remember in days after that, we had Don Evans with news people in airplanes doing news stories taking off on runways, and it always amazed me is how many different scenarios and ideas that people were trying to come up with to explain how this horrific accident happened. And I guess from where I sit, I've been a pilot for nearly 35 years now, and I have flown an awful lot of different types of aircraft, from Cessnas to jets and fighters and every other thing. And I just have to tell you that in a situation like this, the end responsibility is with the guy sitting up front, and I just, I sadly don't know any other way to put it. The guy with his finger on the button is the guy, in this case, that is flying the plane. And you know, there was all that stuff about, you know, they tried to, well, they did. They sued the airport and us and everybody in sight, and they tried to blame it on people in the town. I don't know whether, I don't want to use the word tried to blame. They tried to say that lack of staffing in the tower was contributing or the cause and all that. You know, even, you got to remember, it's dark. The guy in the tower can't even see. I mean, you could see the airplane out there because the lights are blinking on the airplane. But quite honestly, unless the landing or takeoff lights on the aircraft were on, he wouldn't know which way the airplane is specifically pointing. And even if the guy in the tower had seen the airplane going down the runway, by the time he could react, push the button to transmit or call, hey, what are you doing? By that time, it's already too late, because the airplane's already accelerated to over 100 knots and he's halfway down the runway. Well, he couldn't stop even if he wanted to, not on that runway. And so, I mean, all these different scenarios and all these different things that all these people talked about, from my standpoint as a pilot, it boils back down to, he just pointed the plane in the wrong direction. I don't know any other thing to say about it. You know, a 260 heading is markedly different from a 220 heading, and they just lined up on the wrong runway. I hate to try to make it so simple, but I think in the end it is just that simple. And you know, every time you start down a runway, you just gotta know where you are. I read a report the other day over in the Far East. Some number of years ago, a 747 took off on 5 right instead of 5 left, and I can't remember, it was Singapore. I can't remember exactly what it was, but 5 right was closed and had all this construction equipment. And it was pouring down rain, 0 visibility, couldn't see anything at night. And of course they hit, you know, cranes and construction equipment and crashed and killed 150 something people. In a case like that, maybe it's a little different, because 05 right and 05 left, looking on your compass headings and whatnot in the aircraft isn't going to probably tell you the difference, because it's still going to say 050. But when you have different headings, you know, that should be, if the instrumentation in the aircraft is set correctly, you know, pretty obvious that you're pointing the wrong way. It was the worst thing I've ever seen. Quick thing though about that day, and that is the staff and the personnel at Bluegrass Airport I know that was at a period of time when there was a lot of strife and issue going on with the administration here and the people that were running the airport. And you know, a lot of those people were people that I helped hire and bring in here when I was on the board. But I got to tell you, that day, that was the most professional, finest group of people I ever saw. Forget all the other stuff that was going on, but I got to tell you, they were spectacular. I did, and I was, you know, involved in hiring Mike Cobb and bringing him here. And I will say that after that event of 5191, I did pick up the phone. I called Mike and I had a very good conversation with him, and just wanted him to know that regardless of anything else that was going on, had happened or was going to happen, that I thought that he had, and his staff and everybody here had done an exemplary and professional job of not only doing their job, but of representing the airport and the community in what was really a horrible time for us all. And he did, and they did. And I was very proud of all of them. I mean, you just can't, unless you saw that scene with your own eyes, you just cannot imagine. People, that's the sad thing. I mean, people, you know, people think they know about things. Unless you have seen that and stood there and smelled it and seen it, you don't know anything. And I thought I'd seen a lot, and I don't ever want to go there again. But I think we're in a good place here now. I'm glad to be here. I love my job. I love the airport, and I love flying. And I hope I got a few more years to do it.
Were other family members involved in aviation?
My family, the only people involved in aviation were my father and I. Nobody else really took a big shine to aviation. a lot of my family today thinks I'm crazy for flying the old antique, crazy old airplanes that I fly, but that's pretty cool, you know. My grandfather and my uncle, on the other hand, my uncle Brown Elcombs, did have a flight department here, and we had all kinds of cool airplanes. We had jets and DC-3s. We had a private DC-3. We flew back and forth to Florida. That was fun. Until that one night we got in that horrible thunderstorm, and we finally made it back here, and my mother said, "That's it, get a jet." I remember that. We came through some really awful bad weather, and it was really rough. I mean, it was one of the rougher flights I recall. But I distinctly remember my mother turning around. We got off that plane over here. I remember my mother turning to my uncle, her brother, and saying, "That's it with that old hunk of junk," she called it. It's a cool old hunk of junk. It was a DC-3. It was a famous airplane. And she said, "That's it. We get a jet." So they did. And then it was just kind of boring. We got there a lot faster, but it was not as much fun as the DC-3.
Did your mother have an interest in learning to fly?
Oh, absolutely not. She hated it. She used it as a lot of people. It was a tool to get somewhere, and to a lot of people, that's what aviation. I would have to say, to most people, that's what aviation is. It's a means to an end. It's to get me to where I need to go. For me, and I wish a whole lot more. And of course, there's a lot of people like me, but I wish there were lots more. You know, to me, aviation is a lot more than that. Aviation helped save the country in the wars. Aviation provides medical assistance to people that need it. During my years as a paramedic, I did a short stint as a flight paramedic on an evac helicopter, and that was very cool. I wish I could have done that longer. That was in the early days of the aeromedical services using helicopters. And you know, aviation is far, wide, and reaching, and I think people that really look at aviation as a whole are probably amazed at all the different areas that aviation actually touches. And but for me, there's nothing better than coming out on a Sunday afternoon and dragging out one of the old T6s and putting on a flight suit and going flying. That's still, I hope I can do that for a long time. Long enough to get my little boy to take him flying. My greatest thing, but I must say the coolest thing and I've done a lot of things flying airplanes, but I think the coolest thing that I ever did, I'm trying not to get emotional, but my father saw me do it before he died. One of my dreams had been to fly a P-51 Mustang. And most people know that a P-51 Mustang is a very famous World War II fighter. A lot of people attribute it to the ability to win the war in Europe. I don't know that that's completely true, but it certainly had a huge role in it. My partner, Joe Richardson, who's one of the finest guys on the planet, bought a P-51 a few years ago, and we named our company Mustang Aviation. And this particular airplane he bought was an airplane known to me for some 20 years, owned by another gentleman, and I had flown in the back of it many times. And so when Joe bought it and brought it here, and I maintained it for him, and he said, "You're going to go learn to fly this airplane." I said, "No, I'm not flying your very expensive, irreplaceable piece of history." So this argument went on for a couple of years, and long story short, I did finally go and do the training. And I came back, and my solo flight, which was here at Bluegrass Airport, December 17th, 2007, my dad was here. And he got to see me fly it. That was pretty cool. You know, when Dad flew in the war, and P-51 saved his life because he got shot down in a B-29, or shot up and crash landed, I guess I should say. But there were a couple of P-51s that came and helped him, you know, manage to get down without getting actually blown out of the sky. So that was really cool to go out and do that, and get for him to see me do that. And then I guess the only thing cooler than that was I got to take my wife flying in that Mustang, and she was 6 months pregnant at the time. And that was probably my greatest achievement in aviation, was flying her. And she filmed the whole thing, which was, you know, she's back there, typical Carrie, she's back there with the camera. I said, "Honey, put the camera down and just look out." You know, but the good news is she's flown in that airplane a number of times with my very good friend Brad Hood, who is probably one of the best P-51 guys around, and has a couple thousand hours in that airplane. I've got a couple hundred, so that gives you the idea of the experience level. And so she's flown with him numerous times in the airplane. But it was cool, and I got to take her. And she filmed the whole thing. And in a way, I got to fly my son, too. I'm hoping I'll be able to keep flying it long enough to take him one day. So, but it's been a great life in aviation for me. I wouldn't trade any of it.
Tell us about your involvement in the Aviation Museum of Kentucky.
Right now, our emphasis is on getting young people interested in the heritage of the airplane, what it means to the country, and what it means to aviation. The cool thing about some of these high-performance aircraft built in the 40s, the Mustang and the Corsair and the P-47, is not only were they aircraft that were used in the military, but the advancement in aviation, the technical aspect of the aircraft itself, was also spectacular. They designed the P-51 in 120 days and built it. You couldn't design an airplane like that today in 5 years. You know, but there was a war on. There's a different emphasis on what was going on. But one of the things that we had done, or I've done for 20 years, is I've done this so many times I can't, you know, I have to stop and start thinking of them, but taking veterans flying in these airplanes. And I'll tell you one more quick story, which is kind of off, but it happened here at Bluegrass Airport, so we'll make it a Bluegrass Airport story. A couple of years ago, I had a gentleman come to town who was the father of a surgeon that is a friend of mine. The gentleman at the time was 91 years old and in still fairly good condition. Just so happens this gentleman was a ground crewman on the P-51 in World War II, based in England. And on, I believe it was Christmas Eve, 1944, he went across the English Channel in a rubber boat to fight in a little fight they had called the Battle of the Bulge. And his job was the Mustangs that were landing in France to fight and support the Battle of the Bulge. His job was to maintain the guns and the bombs and the armor on the airplane. Fast forward to a couple of years ago. He lives in Montana. He was here visiting his son. And his son, a friend of mine, brought him to the airport thinking he'd like to see the aircraft. And we've got a whole collection of them here. We've got about 12 of them here. And so he comes to the airport and he's looking at all the airplanes, and of course he's looking at the Mustang, and all these old fellas, and there are very few of them left anymore, they go over and they pet the airplane. It's really fascinating to watch them. I mean, it's like seeing an old friend. And chatting with a guy, and so Dr. Joe asked him, he says, hey, did you ever get to go fly in a P-51? And this guy said, oh, Lord, no. First of all, there were no two-seat P-51s back then. Most of these have been converted with a jump seat in the back. and so he says, well, Mr. Dowden, would you like to go fly in this Mustang? And Mr. Dowden said, oh, boy, that'd be great. Well, this guy's 91 years old. And but like I say, he could get around on his own pretty well. So Joe looks at me and he says, well, David, get your gear on, take this guy flying. I said, what are you talking about? Your airplane, you take him flying. He goes, no, I think you need to go take this gentleman flying. So we got him loaded up in the airplane. This is not the kind of thing I normally do, because generally my rule for flying anybody in that aircraft is you have to be able to get out of it on your own. And this guy probably would have had a hard time doing that. Just not capable. And I said, Mr. Dowden, I said, we'll go. We're not going to do any aerobatics. This is going to be a 1G flight. It's a pretty afternoon. We're just going to go fly around. And he goes, I'll never forget what he said. He said, that'll be just great. He says, if I don't come back, this will be the greatest way in the world to go. And I said, Mr. Dowden, we're coming back. Sorry, but we're coming back. So we did. We went and flew. And I thought to myself, next to flying my wife, I thought, how cool is this? How many guys my age are flying a P-51 Mustang in Kentucky with a 91-year-old veteran of the Battle of the Bulge in the back seat? And I'm thinking, maybe none. And that was a spectacular afternoon. And I can't remember it, but the guy wrote a poem afterwards that a friend of mine is writing a book on some of our exploits, and they're going to publish this poem. And I wish I'd have brought it, but I can't remember it. But it was just amazing. Some people have that ability to write. I'm not one of them. And it was just so cool. And so that was another very great, memorable afternoon at Bluegrass Airport. And there have been a few of those that we've done. But that's another one that stands. The more I sit here and think about it, they start popping in my mind. I should write all this down. But that was very cool.